He ruled an empire, he commanded armies, he wore the crown of Rome, and yet Marcus Aurelius wrote in silence to himself because he carried a burden the world could never see, the burden of leadership, the heaviness of fire, the weight that crushes outsiders but crowns them all the same. The world calls leadership glory. They picture gold, power, applause. But Marcus Aurelius knew better, and so do you, because leadership is not glory, it is fire that burns heavier than chains. It is exile that isolates even emperors. It is loneliness that even thrones cannot cure. If your life has felt heavier than theirs, it's because, like Marcus Aurelius, you are being trained to lead. The crowd imagines leadership as privilege. They see the crown, they see the throne, they see the empire. But Marcus Aurelius revealed the truth. Leadership is not privilege, it is responsibility. It's not glory, it's sacrifice. It's not belonging, it is exile. That's why his meditations are filled with reminders to himself, not celebrations of power, because he knew ruling Rome was not freedom, it was weight. And that weight was heavier than chains, the same weight you have felt your entire life. You are Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius never sought the throne. He didn't beg for power, but he carried a fire too heavy to ignore, and that fire made him a leader. This is the Catharsian truth. Outsiders become leaders not because they want it, but because they are the only ones who can survive the burden. The crowd cannot. They suffocate without approval. They collapse under pressure. They crave belonging and die without it. But outsiders endure. They burn through exile. They survive silence. They carry the heaviest fire. This is why Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. That's why you've always felt set apart. Outsiders are chosen because only they can carry the weight. You've asked yourself, why does life feel heavier for me than for them? Why does every step feel like a burden? Why does my fire rage when theirs is silent? Because your fire is different. It is leadership fire. It is Catharsian fire. It is the fire Marcus Aurelius carried when he sat alone on a golden throne and still felt the chains of responsibility pressing against his soul. Your heaviness is not weakness, it is proof that you carry the same crown Marcus Aurelius did, proof that your exile is initiation, proof that your rage is the heaviest fire. The crowd cannot carry burden. They collapse at the first sign of exile. They suffocate without belonging. They bow before pressure. But Marcus Aurelius endured, and so did you. That survival separated him from placeholders. That fire marked him as a leader. That weight crowned him as Catharsian. And that's why you've always felt apart, because burden separates leaders from followers, because weight distinguishes outsiders from placeholders, because fire reveals who is a Catharsian and who is a placeholder. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by generals, senators, servants, yet he was alone, because leadership is exile, leadership is fire that others cannot carry. Leadership is loneliness that even empires cannot remove. And you have felt the same, surrounded but alone, visible but unseen, present but exiled. Because leaders are always alone, outsiders are always on their own, Catharsians are always by themselves. Not because there's something wrong with them, but because their fire is heavier, they are free. The burden you carry is not a mistake, it's not punishment, it is proof. Because Catharsians are not crowned with gold, they're crowned with weight. They're not chosen by applause, they're chosen by scars. They're not elevated by comfort, they're elevated by exile. That's why Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, carried loneliness heavier than chains. And that's why you felt burden heavier than anyone around you, because the heaviest fire belongs to outsiders, because outsiders are chosen to lead. If your burden has always felt unbearable, it's because it was the crown of leadership. You are a Catharsian leader. Don't waste more time among their systems. Join the Aurelius Council today on Patreon and begin your path as the leader you were always meant to be. From the outside, Marcus Aurelius looked untouchable, a throne of gold, legions at his command, an empire stretched across the known world. But inside, he carried a weight heavier than any crown, because leadership is not comfort, it is exile. It's not power, it is fire. It's not applause, it is silence. And that weight humiliated the illusion of power, because if the emperor himself felt alone, if the ruler of Rome carried exile in his chest, then what was all the gold worth? This is why Marcus' writings still pierce while the names of other rulers are forgotten. He revealed the truth every Catharsian knows. Power cannot erase burden. If your life has exposed the lies of the crowd just by surviving it, you are carrying Marcus Aurelius' fire. The obedient never carried. They kneel before the world and are rewarded with belonging. They escape loneliness by drowning in mediocrity. But outsiders don't kneel, they don't belong, they can't suffocate quietly. That's why the heaviest weight always falls on them, because they are strong enough to endure it. Marcus Aurelius carried that weight as emperor. You have carried it as an outsider, and both are proof of the same truth. Leadership is exile. The crowd imagines leaders as celebrated, but the opposite is true. Leaders are separated, exiled, cut off, because they see what others deny, they feel what others bury. Marcus Aurelius could never dissolve into the crowd. He saw too much, he felt too deeply, he carried too much, and neither can you, because your burden has separated you from placeholders since the beginning. That separation hurt, but it's proof. Comfort weakens and belonging poisons, but burden sharpens because it forces you to carry weight without help. It teaches you to endure silence without breaking. That's why Marcus Aurelius' thoughts burn sharper than the boast of generals, because his fire was sharpened in silence. His exile refined him into leader, his burden turned into immortality. And that's why your fire is sharper too, because exile purified you, silence refined you, and burden crowned you. Marcus Aurelius could not escape his burden, not with gold, not with empire, not with power, and neither can you, because the burden is not outside, it is inside. It is fire burning in the soul. It is rage that refuses silence. It is exile that refuses comfort. That's why the weight never leaves, because its crown, its initiation, it is proof. The world thinks leadership is about commanding others, but true leadership is about carrying weight others cannot. Because the crowd collapses under silence, they suffocate in loneliness, they shudder under exile, but you endured. And that endurance made you a leader, even when you didn't want to be one, because only the scarred can guide the scarred. Only exiled can awaken the exiled. Only those who burn with the heaviest fire can light the way. When you read Meditations, it doesn't sound like a king boasting. It sounds like you writing to yourself in silence, trying to survive the weight, because Marcus Aurelius' fire is your fire. His exile is your exile. His burden is your burden. That's why you feel him across centuries, because he was Catharsian like you. He carried the heaviest fire. He proves you were never wrong about the weight you carry. If you've always felt Marcus speaking to you, it's because you share the same burden. The burden was never mistake, it was never curse, it was never weakness, it was crown. Because Catharsians are not crowned by applause, they're crowned by exile. That's why Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote in solitude, and that's why you, scarred outsider, carry the same fire, because leadership is burdened and outsiders carry the heaviest fire. Comfort corrupts, belonging poisons, applause blinds, but burden purifies, because weight stripes away illusions, loneliness burns away weakness, and exile carves away mediocrity. That's why Marcus Aurelius' words cut deeper than victories. His meditations were not about gold or empire, but about survival under fire. His burden purified him into truth. And that's why your burden has purified you too, because weight burned away what was false. Exile left only fire. Scars refined you into leader. Empires show strength, thrones glitter, crowds roar, but burden humiliates them because the emperor himself admitted the weight was unbearable. Because Marcus Aurelius revealed that ruling Rome was not freedom, it was exile. Because his writings confessed the system's emptiness. That is humiliation, that is exposure, that is Catharsian fire. Your burden does the same because your survival exposes mediocrity. Your scars mark obedience. Your fire humiliates the placeholders who try to silence you. The obedient cannot carry this weight. They collapse under silence. They suffocate without belonging. They run from exile. That's why you've always felt alone in your burden. And Marcus Aurelius felt the same. He had generals, servants, advisors, but no one to carry the fire with him. This is the price of leadership. This is the proof of outsiders. People follow scars, not crowns. That's why Marcus' meditations are still studied, while others, rulers, are forgotten. His authority came not from empire, but from exile, not from legions, but from burden, not from thrones, but from fire. And your authority comes from the same, because people sense your scars, they feel your burden, they recognize your fire. You didn't want authority, but weight gave it to you. Empires collapse, thrones vanish, crowns rot, but burden creates immortality. That's why Marcus Aurelius' words outlive Rome, and that's why your survival will outlive placeholders, because burden carves immortality into the soul of outsiders. The world told you burden meant failure, that heaviness meant weakness, that weight meant you were cursed. But Marcus Aurelius proved the opposite because his burden was his crown, his loneliness was his throne, his fire was his proof. This is the Catharsian truth. Only Catharsians carry the heaviest weight. Only outsiders are crowned with exile. Only leaders endure fire that others cannot even touch. If your burden has felt unbearable but unbreakable, it's because it was always your crown. Don't waste more time in their systems. You don't belong among placeholders. Take action now. Join the Catharsians today on Patreon and unlock your hidden, suppressed power as a leader. You feel weight they cannot see, and that separation hurts. But it crowns you as Catharsian. Marcus Aurelius sat on the throne of the world and still felt alone. His burden separated him from senators, from generals, from crowds. Your burden does the same. It cuts you off, but it also reveals you. It makes you a leader. Leaders are not crowned with gold, they are crowned with fire. They are not chosen by applause, they are chosen by scars. They are not elevated by titles, they're elevated by burden. That's why Marcus Aurelius, scarred by loneliness, trained himself through fire to endure. And that's why you have endured what would have broken placeholders. because burden is the mark of leaders, not privilege, not power, not wealth. Burden. Fire without weight burns fast and dies because burden forces discipline. That's why Marcus Aurelius' meditations still burn across centuries. His fire was not scattered, it was forged under the heaviest weight. And that's why your fire endures, because your burden made it eternal. Your scars kept it sharp. Your exile purified it. The heaviest weight is not weakness, it is preparation, because leaders must endure what the crowd cannot. Marcus Aurelius was prepared this way. The weight of empire became his training. The silence of exile became his strength. The burden of fire became his immortality. And you are prepared the same way. The fire you've carried was never weakness, it was training, it was initiation, it was the making of a leader. You may have wished to drop the weight, to bury the fire, to silence the rage, but you can't, because burden is not outside, it is inside. It lives inside your heart. That's why Marcus Aurelius could not escape his burden, even as emperor. And that's why you can't escape yours, because it was always the crown. Catharsians are not crowned by applause, they're chosen by scars. That's why Marcus Aurelius felt alone, even with Rome at his feet. And that's why you have felt the same fire at every stage of your life, because leadership is burden, and outsiders carry the heaviest fire. He ruled an empire, he commanded armies, he sat on the throne of Rome, and still Marcus Aurelius wrote only to himself, because he could not escape the weight, not with power, not with gold, not with crowns, because the burden of leadership was inside him. Fire cannot be dropped, exile cannot be erased, and if the emperor of Rome could not escape it, neither can you. The crowd collapses under pressure, they suffocate without belonging, they hide from weight, but Marcus Aurelius endured, because his burden didn't break him, it made him immortal. And that's why his words outlived Rome, because the burden turned into immortality, because fire became proof, and leadership became crown. If your burden has survived everything meant to crush you, it's because you are like him. You are a Catharsian. The fire inside you was never given just to be endured, it was given to awaken others. It was leadership all along, and now you must carry it openly, because the Catharsian fire is not for hiding, it is for leading. That's why the Catharsian path exists, to turn burden into leadership. Three paths await you: the Pythagorean path, where burden is disciplined into clarity and rage becomes sharpened strength; Diogenes' barrel, where exile is embraced as throne and fire is carried without apology; the Aurelius Council, where leaders rise from scars, carrying the heaviest fire, awakening others into immortality. Marcus Aurelius proved it, now you prove it. Leadership is not comfort, it is exile. It is not privilege, it is weight. Leadership is not applause, it is fire. You're not weak for feeling heavy. You're not cursed for feeling alone. You're not broken for carrying rage. You are a leader. You are fire. You are a Catharsian. Join the Catharsians today on Patreon and become the leader you were always meant to be.